I was arranging flowers in the sunroom when I heard the harsh whispers coming from the dining room. At first, I thought they were discussing the upcoming charity gala or perhaps the family business. But as I paused, scissors in hand, their words reached me with crystal clarity. "She's nothing but a gold digger, a 68-year-old parasite who swooped in to take advantage of Dad when he was vulnerable. Now look at her, acting like she belongs here in this house that our mother built." My hand stilled over the peonies as my stepdaughter Victoria's venomous words hung in the air. Then came my stepson's voice, cold, calculated, and filled with disdain. "Don't worry. The prenup was ironclad, and we're amending Father's will tomorrow while she's out at her silly garden club. That woman won't see a penny of the Hamilton fortune when he's gone. She'll be right back where she belongs, in whatever middle-class mediocrity she came from." I didn't drop the scissors. I didn't gasp or cry out. Instead, a small smile formed on my lips as I carefully set down my garden shears and smoothed my apron. The Hamiltons had no idea who they were dealing with. They were so convinced I'd married Charles for his money, so certain I was some desperate old woman clinging to their father's fortune. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to discover, was that the gold digger they were plotting against was Margaret Sullivan, sole heir to the Sullivan shipping empire, with assets that made the Hamilton holdings look like pocket change. I finished arranging the peonies with steady hands, taking my time as the conversation in the dining room shifted to other topics. There was no rush. Let them believe what they wanted about me. I had endured their snide comments and not-so-subtle insults for 3 years now, ever since I'd married Charles at the age of 65. 3 years of Victoria's cold stares across the dinner table, of Alexander's condescending explanations about finances, as if I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of money management. 3 years of being the outsider, the interloper, the woman who would never measure up to the sainted Elizabeth Hamilton, their mother who had passed away 5 years before I met Charles. I carried the finished flower arrangement into the formal living room, placing it on the antique mahogany table that Catherine, Charles's youngest daughter, had once told me was a family heirloom that predates your relationship with father by 2 centuries. I remember smiling politely at the time, not bothering to mention that I had similar pieces in storage from my family's historic Boston estate, pieces that made this table look like mass-produced furniture. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed noon, reminding me that Charles would be home soon for lunch. Charles Hamilton, my husband of 3 years, wealthy industrialist and owner of Hamilton Industries. The man who had swept me off my feet at a charity auction, who had pursued me with flowers and handwritten notes, who had proposed under the stars at his vineyard in Napa. Charles, who loved me, not for my money, not for my family name. Charles, who had no idea that his children were plotting against me, or that I was actually wealthier than his entire family combined. I had kept my wealth private not out of deception, but out of desire for authenticity. After my first husband Michael passed away 7 years ago, leaving me the entire Sullivan fortune, I'd endured a parade of suitors who were transparently interested in my bank accounts. When I met Charles at that auction, where I'd donated, anonymously, the relief of being seen as just Margaret, a silver-haired woman in a simple but elegant blue dress, had been intoxicating. When he'd asked about my background, I'd simply said I was comfortable but not wealthy. It wasn't a lie. Comfortable was a laughable understatement, but it had served its purpose. He'd fallen in love with me, not my money. And I had fallen for him, his warmth, his intellect, his passion for life, even at 70. His children, however, had made assumptions from day one. I was older, therefore I was desperate. I had moved into the Hamilton mansion, therefore I was after their inheritance. I dressed simply and didn't flaunt designer labels, Therefore, I must be poor. And now they were plotting to cut me out entirely, to leave me destitute after their father's death. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so cruel. The front door opened, and Charles's warm voice called out, "Margaret, are you home, my dear?" I smoothed my hands over my simple linen dress and went to greet my husband. Charles looked distinguished as always in his tailored suit, silver hair neatly combed, intelligent blue eyes lighting up when he saw me. "There, you are," he said, taking my hands and kissing my cheek. "How's your morning been?" "Enlightening," I replied with a small smile. "Your children are in the dining room. They've been here for about an hour." Charles's expression tightened almost, imperceptibly. He loved his children, but he wasn't blind to their attitudes toward me. "I didn't know they were coming by." "It seems they wanted to discuss some business matters with you," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Something about amending your will." A flash of anger crossed his face, quickly controlled. "I see. Well, they can wait a bit longer. I came home to have lunch with my beautiful wife." I squeezed his hand, love welling up inside me. This was why I had kept my silence for 3 years, enduring the snubs and insults. Charles was worth it. But now, with whispered plots and secret meetings, the situation had changed. It was time for the Hamiltons to learn exactly who they were dealing with. Charles and I had just settled in the kitchen nook with sandwiches when Victoria swept in, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair framing a face that had seen the best plastic surgeons money could buy. At 45, she worked hard to look 35, and largely succeeded except for the bitterness that had begun to etch lines around her mouth. "Daddy, we've been waiting for you," she said, pointedly ignoring me. "We need to discuss some important business matters." Charles took a deliberate bite of his sandwich. "Whatever it is can wait until after lunch, Victoria. I'm enjoying some time with Margaret." Victoria's smile tightened. "It's rather urgent, I'm afraid. It concerns the future of Hamilton Industries." "Nothing is so urgent it can't wait 30 minutes, Charles replied firmly. "You and Alexander are welcome to join us for lunch, or you can wait in my study. I'll be there after Margaret and I have finished." Victoria glanced at me then, her gaze cold. "This is a family matter, Daddy." The implication hung in the air. I wasn't family. Charles's hand tightened around his water glass, but before he could respond, I spoke up. "You know, Victoria, I've been thinking about redecorating the East Wing. Perhaps you'd like to help. I know how important this house is to you." My voice was smooth as honey, giving no indication that I'd overheard their earlier conversation. Victoria's expression flickered between suspicion and surprise. It was the first time I'd explicitly acknowledged her attachment to the house. "The East Wing has been the same since Mother designed it. It doesn't need changing." "Change can be difficult," I acknowledged with a gentle smile. "But sometimes it reveals unexpected treasures. You might be surprised by what you discover when you look beneath the surface." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly trying to decipher if there was a hidden meaning in my words. "I prefer things as they are," she finally said. "Clear and transparent." "Do you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I've always found that people who insist on transparency often have the most to hide." A flush crept up Victoria's neck. Charles looked between us, sensing the undercurrent but not understanding its source. "Victoria, please tell Alexander that I'll meet you both in my study in half an hour. Now, if you'll excuse us." With a tight nod, Victoria turned on her expensive heel and left. Charles sighed heavily. "I'm sorry about that, Margaret. My children can be difficult." "They love you," I said simply. "They're protective of you, of your legacy." "That doesn't excuse their treatment of you," he said, covering my hand with his. "You've been nothing but gracious to them." I smiled, patting his hand. "Don't worry about me, darling. I've developed quite a thick skin over the years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I paused, considering my next words carefully. Charles, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you, about my background. His eyes met mine, curious. What is it? But before I could continue, his phone rang, the special ringtone he used for urgent business matters. He glanced at it and grimaced. I'm sorry, my dear. It's the Singapore deal. I have to take this. I nodded in understanding. Go ahead. We can talk later. As he left to take the call, I cleaned up our lunch dishes, thinking about what I had been about to reveal. Perhaps it was for the best that we'd been interrupted. This wasn't a conversation to be rushed, and there were preparations I needed to make first. I dried my hands and headed to the library, where I kept a small writing desk. It was time to make a call of my own, to Jonathan Wells, my personal attorney who had managed the Sullivan affairs for decades. The man who was the only person in this town who knew exactly who Margaret Sullivan Hamilton really was. The library was quiet, sunlight streaming through the tall windows and highlighting the dust motes in the air. I settled into the leather chair at my desk and picked up my private cell phone. Not the one Charles had given me, but my own secure line that I kept for Sullivan business. Jonathan answered on the second ring. Margaret, what a pleasure. It's been too long. Hello, Jonathan. I'm afraid I need your assistance with a rather delicate matter, I said, keeping my voice low despite being alone in the library. Of course. Is everything all right? I explained what I had overheard, Victoria and Alexander's. Plans to amend Charles's will behind my back, their obvious contempt. I see, Jonathan said, his tone serious. And you believe they're acting without your husband's knowledge? Charles would never approve of this. He's fair-minded and generous, but his children have always had an outsized influence on him, especially regarding the family business and inheritance. And you're ready to reveal your true financial status? Jonathan asked. He had never understood my decision to keep my wealth hidden from my new husband and his family. I believe the time has come, yes, but I want to do it carefully, strategically. This isn't about humiliating the Hamiltons. It's about establishing respect. Jonathan chuckled. Margaret, when you reveal that your net worth is roughly 8 times that of the entire Hamilton fortune, respect will be the least of what you establish. I smiled despite myself. Perhaps, but I need your help preparing the necessary documentation, and I'd like you to be present when I make the revelation. Of course. When were you thinking? Their annual family business meeting is next week. All 3 children will be there, along with Charles. It seems the perfect opportunity, don't you think? Indeed. Shall I bring the full portfolio? Yes. And Jonathan? Let's also prepare options for some joint ventures between Sullivan Shipping and Hamilton Industries. This doesn't have to be adversarial. Once they recover from their shock, there could be valuable synergies for both families. Always the businesswoman, Jonathan said approvingly. I'll have everything ready. After ending the call, I sat in contemplative silence. For 3 years, I had kept my true identity quiet, content to be simply Margaret, Charles's wife. The arrangement had suited me. After decades of being courted for my money, being loved for myself had been refreshing. But I was no longer willing to endure his children's contempt and scheming. It was time for the Hamiltons to learn who they were dealing with. I was interrupted from my thoughts by a soft knock at the library door. It was Catherine, Charles's youngest at 38, and the least openly hostile of his children. Unlike her siblings, who had inherited their mother's blonde coloring, Catherine took after Charles with dark hair and thoughtful blue eyes. Margaret? Father's looking for you. The meeting in his study is over. I closed my journal and stood. Thank you, Catherine. How did it go? She hesitated, conflict evident on her face. Unlike Victoria and Alexander, Catherine occasionally showed signs of wanting to establish a relationship with me. They didn't get what they wanted. Father refused to make any changes to his will? I see, I said neutrally, though inside I felt a surge of warmth for my husband's loyalty. Catherine fidgeted with the pearl bracelet on her wrist, a family heirloom I knew that had belonged to her mother. Victoria's upset. She said some things about me being a gold digger who doesn't deserve your father's money, I supplied calmly. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. You heard? It's hardly a new sentiment in this house, I remarked, gathering my cardigan. Your sister has made her feelings quite clear from the beginning. It's not personal, Catherine said weakly. She's just protective of our family legacy. I paused by the door, looking Catherine directly in the eye. Everything is personal, Catherine. Money, legacy, family, they're all deeply personal. The question is whether we let our assumptions about others dictate our actions without bothering to learn the truth. What truth? She asked, something like curiosity flickering in her expression. I smiled enigmatically. That appearances can be deceiving. That perhaps there's more to your father's wife than a woman who married into wealth. Before she could respond, I left the library to find Charles. He was in the garden, his favorite place to decompress after difficult conversations. I joined him on the stone bench beside the rose bushes I had helped revitalize after years of neglect following his first wife's death. That couldn't have been pleasant, I said softly, taking his hand. Charles sighed. Heavily. They want me to change my will, to put everything into a trust they control, with you receiving only a modest stipend. His jaw tightened. As if I would ever agree to something so insulting. They're afraid, Charles. They don't know me like... You do? They've had 3 years to get to know you, he said grimly. Instead, they've chosen to judge and condemn without evidence. He turned to face me fully. Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. My heart quickened. Of course. Earlier, before my call interrupted us, you were about to tell me something about your background. What was it? I looked into his kind eyes and made a decision. The family meeting was still a week away, but Charles deserved to know now. I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my financial situation, I said carefully. Charles's expression remained open, curious rather than suspicious. In what way? When we met, I told you I was comfortable, but not wealthy. That wasn't exactly accurate. I took a deep breath. Charles, my first husband, was Michael Sullivan, of Sullivan Shipping. His eyes widened slightly. Sullivan Shipping was a global enterprise, one of the largest privately owned shipping companies in the world. Even the business-savvy Hamiltons would recognize the name. Michael Sullivan? The shipping magnate? The one who passed away about 7 years ago? I nodded. Yes, we were married for 40 years. When he died, I became the sole owner of Sullivan Shipping and all associated holdings. I paused, letting that sink in. Charles, I'm not just comfortable. I'm what you might call extremely wealthy. Charles stared at me, processing this information. Then, to my surprise, he began to laugh. A deep, genuine laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Oh, Margaret, he managed between chuckles. If only Victoria and Alexander could hear this. They've been so worried about their inheritance, so convinced you're after the Hamilton fortune. I smiled, relieved by his reaction. And all this time, my portfolio has made the Hamilton holdings look like a modest retirement account. Charles took my hands in his expression growing serious, though his eyes still twinkled with amusement. Why didn't you tell me? Were you testing me? I shook my head. Not testing, no. But after Michael died, I experienced what it's like to be wanted, for money rather than myself. When I met you and you didn't recognize me, there aren't many photos of me in the press. It was refreshing. You liked me for me. I loved you for you, he corrected gently. I still do. I know, I said, squeezing his hands. That's why I married you. And why I've kept quiet about my background, even as your children made their assumptions. But after what I overheard today, Charles's expression darkened. What exactly did you hear? I told him about the conversation between Victoria and Alexander, their plan to amend his will while I was out, their determination to leave me with nothing. Charles's jaw tightened with anger. That's unacceptable. I'll speak to them immediately. I placed a restraining hand on his arm. I have a better idea. The annual family business meeting is next week, yes? Let's wait until then. A slow smile spread across my face. I think it's time for the Hamiltons to meet the real Margaret Sullivan. Charles looked at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. Then he began to laugh again, shaking his head in wonder. My dear, I believe that's going to be the most memorable family meeting in Hamilton history. Indeed, I agreed, a mischievous glint in my eye. They wanted transparency? Well, they're about to get it, along with a very valuable lesson about making assumptions. As we sat together in the garden, planning our revelation, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For 3 years, I had downplayed who I was, accepting subtle insults and contempt from Charles's children. But no more. The gold digger they had dismissed was about to show her true colors, and they were Sullivan blue, the color of old money, vast oceans, and limitless power. The week leading up to the Hamilton family business meeting passed with an electric undercurrent of tension. Victoria and Alexander had retreated to lick their wounds after Charles's refusal to change his will. But their cold glares whenever we crossed paths told me this battle was far from over. Only Catherine showed signs of curiosity, watching me with thoughtful eyes during our shared meals, as if trying to decipher the enigma I had suddenly become in her mind. Charles and I maintained our usual routine. Breakfast in the sunroom, his work at Hamilton Industries, my charity commitments and garden club meetings. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, we were meticulously preparing for what would undoubtedly be a seismic shift in the family dynamic. Jonathan had been sending documents for my review, financial portfolios and potential business proposals, that would soon shatter the Hamiltons' perception of their stepmother. On Tuesday morning, I received an unexpected visitor while Charles was at the office. I was in the garden, pruning my prized heritage roses, when Catherine approached hesitantly, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the outdoor setting in her crisp white blouse and tailored pants. "Margaret, do you have a moment?" she asked, hovering at the edge of the garden path. I set down my pruning shears and removed my gardening gloves. "Of course, Catherine. Would you like some tea? I was about to take a break anyway." She nodded, and we settled at the wrought iron table under the pergola, where the housekeeper had already left a pitcher of iced tea in anticipation of the midday heat. I poured us each a glass, noting how Catherine's fingers tapped nervously against the tablecloth. "What's on your mind?" I asked directly, deciding to spare us both the pretense of small talk. Catherine took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize for Victoria and Alexander's behavior. What they were trying to do with Father's will, it wasn't right. I studied her face, searching for signs of insincerity but finding none. "Thank you, Catherine. That's very gracious of you. And," she continued, looking down at her untouched tea, "I wanted to ask about what you said the other day. About there being more to you than we assumed." A small smile played at my lips. "Are you asking if I'm really a gold digger, Catherine?" Her cheeks flushed. "No, I mean, I never thought—" She stopped, composing herself. Victoria and Alexander have always been protective of Father's money. After Mother died, there were women who pursued him quite aggressively, and they assumed I was just another fortune hunter, I finished for her. A particularly elderly and patient one. Catherine had the grace to look embarrassed. They can be judgmental. And what about you, Catherine? What did you think when your father brought home a silver-haired widow he'd met at a charity auction? She considered this, twirling a strand of dark hair around her finger, a gesture so reminiscent of Charles that it made my heart soften toward her despite everything. I thought you made him happy, she said finally. After Mother died, he was existing, not living. You brought him back to life. I was touched by her candor. Your father brought me back to life too, you know. Widowhood can be a lonely path. Your first husband, Catherine ventured. What did he do? Father never mentioned. I took a sip of my tea, wondering how much to reveal before the official announcement. He was in shipping, I said simply. International trade. Was it a long marriage? 40 years, I replied. We met when I was 22, fresh out of business. School, one of the few women in my class. Michael was brilliant, driven. Much like your father in that regard. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. Business school? I thought... She stopped herself. You thought I was a housewife who married... Your father for financial security, I finished without rancor. It's all right, Catherine. Assumptions are natural. It's what we do with them that matters. She flushed again. I'm sorry. I waved off her apology. The family meeting is this Friday, isn't it? Catherine nodded. Yes, the quarterly review. Victoria's been working on some kind of presentation. She won't tell me what it's about, but she keeps saying it's essential for the family's security. I smiled inwardly, wondering how Victoria's presentation would stack up against the revelation I had planned. I look forward to it, I said mildly. I've always been interested in business operations. Catherine gave me a curious look but didn't press further. As she rose to leave, she hesitated, then asked, Why did you never correct us? About who you were? I considered her question carefully. When I married your father, I wanted to be valued for myself, not my background or other factors. And sometimes, Catherine, people reveal more of themselves when they think you have no power. She absorbed this, a new awareness dawning in her eyes. I'll see you at dinner, she said finally, and walked back toward the house with the thoughtful gait of someone reassessing long-held beliefs. That evening, I placed a call to my daughter Rebecca from my first marriage. At 43, Rebecca was the current COO of Sullivan Shipping and would eventually take over as CEO when I decided to fully retire. Unlike me, she had never stepped away from the family business, diving in headfirst after graduating from Harvard Business School. Mom, she answered warmly, how's life among the Hamiltons? Approaching a turning point, I replied, settling into the window seat of my private sitting room. I've decided to end my little experiment in anonymity. Finally, Rebecca exclaimed. I never understood why you let them think you were some kind of penniless widow, especially those awful stepchildren of yours. I laughed softly. Not all of them are awful. Catherine came to speak with me today. There's potential there. And the others? Victoria and the brother, Alexander? They've been plotting to cut me out of Charles's will, I said. They think I'm a burden, a parasite. Rebecca's indignation flowed through the phone. When are you planning to drop the Sullivan? Bomb on them? At the family business meeting this Friday. Jonathan's bringing the documentation. Oh, to be a fly on that wall, Rebecca said with relish. Do you want me there? I could fly in from Boston tomorrow. I considered her offer. Having Rebecca there, brilliant, confident, undeniably successful, would certainly add impact to the revelation. But this was a delicate family matter, and introducing too many players might complicate the situation unnecessarily. Not this time, I decided. This needs to be between me and the Hamiltons. But perhaps you could clear your schedule. For next week? If all goes well, there might be interesting possibilities for collaboration between Sullivan and Hamilton. Synergy between shipping and manufacturing, Rebecca mused. It makes sense. Dad always said the Hamiltons ran a tight operation, even if their scale was modest compared to ours. Charles is an excellent businessman, I confirmed, and a good man. His children just need to understand that I'm not a threat to their legacy. In fact, I might be its salvation. After saying goodbye to Rebecca, I joined Charles for dinner. Victoria and Alexander had made excuses not to join us, but Catherine was there, quieter than usual, observing our interactions with new eyes. "How was your day, my dear?" Charles asked, serving me a portion of roast before taking his own. "Illuminating," I replied. "Catherine and I had a lovely chat in the garden." Charles glanced between us, pleased. "Did you? That's wonderful." Catherine nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Margaret was telling me about her first husband. He was in shipping, apparently." "Indeed he was," Charles said easily, as we had agreed to be forthright if directly asked. "Quite successful at it, too, from what I understand. An understatement of magnificent proportions. But Catherine didn't need to know that just yet. She would learn along with her siblings on Friday. "And your daughter from your first marriage," Catherine ventured. "What does she do?" "Rebecca followed in her father's footsteps," I said. "She works in the family business." "Will she be joining us for the family meeting?" Catherine asked, causing me to reassess her perceptiveness. "Not this time," I said. "But perhaps soon." The conversation shifted to other topics, but I could feel Catherine's attention, the wheels turning in her mind as she pieced together the fragments of information I had shared. Unlike her siblings, Catherine had an analytical mind, less clouded by emotion and preconception. I found myself hoping that after Friday's revelation, she might become an ally rather than an adversary. Thursday evening, the night before the meeting, Jonathan arrived in town. We met at a discreet cafe downtown, away from the Hamilton estate and the prying eyes of Charles's children. At 72, Jonathan Wells was still sharp as a tack, his legal mind undiminished by age. He had served the Sullivan family for nearly 5 decades, starting as a young associate under my father-in-law's trusted attorney, and eventually becoming our family's primary legal counsel. "Everything is in order," he confirmed, sliding a sleek, leather portfolio across the table. "Financial statements, property holdings, company valuation, your personal net worth statement, all updated as of this quarter." I opened the portfolio, scanning the numbers that represented the Sullivan legacy, a shipping empire that spanned continents, property holdings in 12 countries, investment portfolios that had weathered economic storms and emerged stronger, philanthropic foundations that supported causes close to my heart. The total value made even me pause, despite having lived with these figures for decades. "And the business proposal?" I asked, turning to the last section. Jonathan nodded. "A preliminary outline for potential collaboration between Sullivan Shipping and Hamilton Industries. Nothing too detailed, just enough to show good faith and potential mutual benefit." I closed the portfolio, satisfied. "Perfect. Charles and I have discussed how to approach this. He'll open the meeting with the usual business, then hand the floor to me before Victoria can launch whatever scheme she's been preparing." Jonathan's eyes twinkled with anticipation. "In my 50 years of legal practice, I don't think I've ever looked forward to a meeting quite this much." I laughed softly. "It's not about humiliating them, Jonathan." "Of course not," he agreed, though his expression suggested he wouldn't mind if that were a side effect. "It's about establishing respect and clearing the air for a healthy family dynamic going forward." Exactly. Though I won't deny a certain satisfaction in finally setting the record straight. After finishing our coffee, Jonathan escorted me to my car, a modest sedan that had been part of my understated persona these past 3 years. Tomorrow, perhaps, it would be time to bring the Bentley out of storage. That night, I slept surprisingly well, my conscience clear and my path forward certain. Charles, however, was restless beside me, getting up several times to pace by the window. Are you having second thoughts? I asked softly after his third trip out of bed. He turned, moonlight silvering his profile. No, not about revealing the truth. But I'm troubled by my children's behavior. I raised them to be better than this. I sat up, turning on the bedside lamp. They love you, Charles. They're protective of what they see as their birthright. That doesn't excuse their treatment of you, he said, coming to sit beside me on the bed. Or their underhanded plotting. I took his hand. Tomorrow will be a new beginning. Once they understand who I really am, they'll realize I've never been a threat to their inheritance. And if they don't? He asked, voicing the concern that had clearly been weighing on him. If they can't accept you even after learning the truth? I considered this possibility. In my business career, I had always planned for contingencies, anticipated potential failures, and prepared accordingly. But in matters of family, the heart and ego were wild variables that couldn't always be predicted or controlled. Then we'll address that situation if it arises, I said finally. But I believe in giving people the chance to rise to their best selves, Charles. Tomorrow, we're giving your children that chance. He kissed my forehead, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. You're remarkable, Margaret Sullivan Hamilton. The most patient, strategic, and kind-hearted woman I've ever known. Save the compliments for tomorrow, I teased gently. After the meeting, you can tell me how brilliant and magnanimous I am. As he laughed and settled back beside me, I allowed myself to imagine the faces of Victoria and Alexander when they learned the truth. Not out of malice, but out of a simple human desire for vindication. After 3 years of sideways glances and whispered insults, of being treated as an interloper and a gold digger, tomorrow would bring a reckoning. The so-called gold digger would finally reveal her true worth, not just in dollars and cents, but in dignity, restraint, and wisdom. And perhaps, if the Hamiltons were wise enough to recognize it, in the potential for a legacy far greater than they had ever imagined. Hamilton Industries headquarters occupied the top 5 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in the financial district. As Charles and I rode the private elevator to the executive level, I felt a flutter of anticipation. Not nervousness, exactly, but the familiar surge of adrenaline I used to feel before major business negotiations. I had dressed deliberately, for the occasion in a tailored navy suit, Sullivan blue, though the Hamiltons wouldn't recognize the significance yet, with a subtle strand of pearls that had been in my family for generations. Ready? Charles asked as the elevator doors opened, revealing a corridor of polished marble leading to the boardroom. I squeezed his hand. I've been ready for 3 years. The boardroom was impressive by most standards, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering panoramic city views, a massive mahogany table that could seat 20, state-of-the-art presentation technology. Having sat at tables where trillion-dollar shipping routes were negotiated, I found it charming rather than intimidating, but I could appreciate the statement it made. Victoria, Alexander, and Catherine were already seated, along with 5 other executives from Hamilton Industries' senior leadership team. Jonathan had arrived separately and was engaged in polite conversation with Hamilton's CFO, a distinguished-looking woman named Eleanor Winters, who, from what Charles had told me, was one of the few people who had occasionally challenged Victoria's more aggressive business strategies. Heads turned as we entered, eyes widening slightly at my attire. In the 3 years since marrying Charles, I had rarely dressed in business formal, preferring comfortable elegance for social occasions and practical clothing for my gardening and charity work. I could see the confusion on Victoria's face, the slight narrowing of Alexander's eyes as he tried to determine what this change in appearance might mean. "Good morning, everyone," Charles said, guiding me to the seat at his right hand, traditionally the place of honor in the Hamilton boardroom. Victoria, seated across from me, couldn't quite hide her grimace. "I believe most of you know my wife, Margaret." Nods and murmured greetings followed. I smiled pleasantly, noticing Catherine's curious gaze and the barely concealed hostility emanating from her siblings, And this, Charles continued, indicating Jonathan, is Jonathan Wells, who will be joining us for today's meeting. Your attorney? Victoria asked sharply, unable to contain herself. Why is he here? Charles raised an eyebrow at his daughter's tone. All in due time, Victoria. Shall we begin with the quarterly review? For the next 45 minutes, Charles led a standard business meeting, reviewing Hamilton Industries' performance over the past quarter, discussing market challenges and opportunities, and outlining strategic priorities for the coming months. Throughout, I observed the dynamics around the table with the practiced eye of someone who had led similar meetings for decades. Victoria was competent but forceful, often cutting off others to assert her points. Alexander was quieter but watchful, interjecting primarily on financial matters. Catherine contributed thoughtful analyses when asked, but seemed content to absorb rather than dominate. The executive team showed the polished deference of professionals who respected their CEO, but perhaps feared his children's future authority more. I caught Catherine glancing at me several times, clearly wondering why I was present for what had always been a family-only affair. I kept my expression pleasantly attentive, occasionally jotting notes on the portfolio Jonathan had prepared for me. Another oddity that didn't escape Victoria's notice. And now, Charles said, concluding the operational review. Before we move to new business, I'd like to invite Margaret to address the table. A charged silence fell. Victoria's pen clattered onto the table. Alexander straightened in his chair, a muscle working in his jaw. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her eyes intent on me. Thank you, Charles, I said, my voice steady and clear, as I opened my portfolio. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. For the past 3 years, I've been honored to be part of the Hamilton family, though I recognize that my presence has caused certain concerns for some of you. Victoria's lips thinned, but she remained silent. These concerns, I believe, stem largely from assumptions about my background and intentions in marrying Charles. Assumptions that it's time to address directly. I met each of their gazes in turn, including the curious executives who had suddenly found themselves with front-row seats to what was clearly an unexpected family drama. I was born Margaret Elizabeth Sullivan in Boston, Massachusetts, I continued. My father, James Sullivan, founded Sullivan Maritime Trading in 1938, which my first husband, Michael Sullivan, later expanded into what is now known as Sullivan Shipping International. A ripple of recognition passed through the room. Sullivan Shipping was a corporate behemoth, one of the largest privately held companies in the world, with a fleet that transported everything from consumer goods to industrial machinery across every major shipping route on the planet. When Michael passed away 7 years ago, I said, I became the sole shareholder and chairman of Sullivan Shipping, positions I still hold today, though daily operations are managed by our executive team, including my daughter Rebecca, who serves as COO. Alexander's face had gone pale. Victoria sat frozen, her expression caught between shock and disbelief. Catherine's eyes had widened, her keen mind already calculating the implications. Jonathan, I said, turning to my attorney, would you please distribute the materials we've prepared? Jonathan rose and placed identical folders in front of each person at the table. Inside, you'll find an overview of Sullivan Shipping's current operations, financial position, and global footprint, I explained as they opened the folders. You'll also find a statement of my personal holdings separate from the company assets. The room fell silent as eyes scanned the documents, taking in figures that told a story far different from the one the Hamiltons had believed, a story of wealth that dwarfed their own considerable fortune many times over. Eleanor Winters, Hamilton's CFO, was the first to react, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages. This is extraordinary, she murmured, professional composure momentarily slipping. Victoria finally found her voice. This is absurd, she sputtered, looking up from the documents with flushed cheeks. If this were true, why would I? Marry your father without revealing my financial status? I finished for her. Because, Victoria, contrary to what you and Alexander have believed, not everyone views marriage as a financial transaction. I married Charles because I fell in love with him. His character, his intellect, his kindness. I wanted to be valued for myself, not my bank accounts. But the Hamilton estate, Alexander interjected, the first words he'd spoken directly to me in months. You moved into our family home. Because Charles asked me to, I said simply. My primary residence in Boston and my other properties remained in my name. I could have insisted we live elsewhere. But I understood the Hamilton estate's importance to your family legacy. It was not a sacrifice for me to honor that. Charles reached over and took my hand, his expression a mixture of pride and love. For 3 years, he said, addressing his children directly, Margaret has endured your suspicion and, at times, outright hostility, all because you assumed she married me for money. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so painful. Victoria's face had shifted from shock to a defensive anger. You deliberately deceived us, she accused me. You let us believe— I never lied to any of you, I interrupted firmly. Not once. You never asked about my background beyond the most superficial details. You were too busy assuming I was an opportunistic gold digger to consider any alternative. But why reveal this now? Catherine asked, her analytical mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. After 3 years of saying nothing, I met her gaze directly. Because I overheard you and your siblings discussing plans to amend your father's will to cut me out entirely. You called me, and I quote, a 68-year-old parasite who swooped in to take advantage of Dad when he was vulnerable. The executives around the table shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their water glasses or notepads. Victoria had the grace to flush crimson, while Alexander stared stonily at the documents before him. I've been patient with your assumptions and insults, I continued, my voice level but firm. I've tolerated them because I love your father and wanted to give his children time to know me as a person. But I draw the line at secretive attempts to disinherit me, not because I need Charles's money, as you now understand, but because such actions reveal a profound lack of respect for both me and your father's judgment. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Charles cleared his throat. I think what Margaret is trying to say is that it's time for a reset in our family dynamics, a chance to build relationships based on truth rather than misconception. I nodded, turning to the final page in the folder I'd prepared. Which brings me to the last item I'd like to discuss today. On page 12, you'll find a preliminary proposal for strategic collaboration between Sullivan Shipping and Hamilton Industries. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly as business curiosity temporarily overrode family drama. Even Victoria couldn't help but turn to the indicated page. Sullivan's global shipping network, combined with Hamilton's manufacturing capabilities, presents significant opportunities for vertical integration, I explained. Reduced shipping costs for Hamilton products, prioritized transport scheduling, potential for joint expansion into emerging markets. Eleanor Winters was nodding thoughtfully, already seeing the possibilities. This could revolutionize our Asia-Pacific strategy, she noted, glancing at Charles. The cost savings alone would be substantial. This isn't a bribe, I clarified, looking directly at Victoria and Alexander. It's a legitimate business opportunity that could benefit both our companies. But it requires something essential, mutual, respect and trust between our families. Catherine was studying the proposal with keen interest. The operational synergies are compelling, she noted, addressing me directly with a newfound professional respect. Have you considered how this might affect Hamilton's existing shipping contracts? A valid question, I acknowledged. And exactly the kind of practical consideration we would address in more detailed discussions. Jonathan has prepared a preliminary analysis of contract integration strategies, if you're interested. For the next 20 minutes, the conversation shifted toward business possibilities, with Catherine and the Hamilton executives engaging substantively with the proposal. Victoria remained notably silent, while Alexander contributed a few terse but relevant questions about financial implications. As the discussion wound down, Charles checked his watch. "I think we've covered a lot of ground today, both personal and professional. Why don't we adjourn for lunch? Margaret has arranged a private dining room at the Metropolitan Club where we can continue our conversation in a more relaxed setting." The executives excused themselves, leaving only the family members and Jonathan. As the room cleared, Victoria finally looked directly at me, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "All this time," she said quietly, "you could have bought and sold Hamilton Industries 10 times over." "The point was never about money, Victoria," I replied evenly. "It was about family. Something I hoped to become part of when I married your father." She stood abruptly, gathering her papers. "I need some air before lunch." Alexander followed her without a word, his expression unreadable. Only Catherine remained, studying me with new eyes. "Well," she said finally, a small, rueful smile playing at her lips, "I suppose this puts our conversation in the garden in a rather different light." I returned her smile. "Perhaps." "For what it's worth," she added, rising to leave, "I'm sorry for not seeing past my own assumptions." "It's a start," I acknowledged. "See you at lunch?" She nodded, then followed her siblings out, leaving Charles and me alone with Jonathan. "Well," my attorney said dryly, "that was certainly worth the trip from Boston." Charles exhaled slowly. "That could have gone worse." "It could have gone better too," I noted, gathering my materials. "Victoria and Alexander will need time." "And Catherine?" Charles asked. I smiled thoughtfully. "Catherine, I think, might surprise us all. She has her mother's looks, but your business acumen, and a flexibility of mind her siblings lack." As we prepared to leave for lunch, I felt a curious mixture of vindication and uncertainty. The truth was finally out, the misconceptions cleared away. But whether this revelation would heal the family rifts or deepen them remained to be seen. What was certain was that Margaret Sullivan Hamilton would never again be dismissed as a gold-digging burden. I had reclaimed my identity and my dignity. Whatever came next would unfold on entirely new terms, terms that acknowledged who I truly was, not who the Hamiltons had assumed me to be. The Metropolitan Club occupied the top floor of a historic building downtown, its elegant dining rooms offering panoramic views of the city. I had deliberately reserved the Winthrop Room, named after one of Boston's oldest families, a subtle reminder of my own New England heritage. A small, private space with a single table, it provided the perfect setting for what would inevitably be a tense family lunch. Charles and I arrived first with Jonathan, who had graciously agreed to stay despite the personal nature of the coming conversation. "Sometimes having a neutral third party helps moderate difficult discussions," he'd observed, and I was grateful for his diplomatic presence. The maitre d' had just poured our water when Catherine arrived, alone. "Victoria and Alexander are on their way," she said, taking a seat across from me. "They're processing." "I imagine so," I said dryly. "Thank you for coming ahead." Catherine studied me with new eyes. "I have questions," she admitted. "Many questions." "I expect nothing less," I replied, "and I promise complete honesty." Before she could begin, the door opened again. Victoria entered. First, her face a mask of composed professionalism that didn't quite conceal the turmoil beneath. Alexander followed, his earlier shock now hardened into something more calculating. "Shall we order before we talk?" Charles suggested once they were seated. No one objected, and we went through the motions of selecting from the menu. I noticed Victoria chose the most expensive entree, a small, petty gesture that revealed she was still off balance. After the waiter departed, a heavy silence fell over the table. Finally, Alexander broke it. "So," he said, his voice deliberately, casual as he stirred his iced tea. "Sullivan Shipping, the Sullivan family. One might wonder why there's been virtually no press coverage connecting Margaret Hamilton with one of the world's largest shipping empires." His implication was clear. He still doubted the truth of my claims, despite the documentation. "A fair question," I acknowledged. "When Michael was alive, he was the public face of Sullivan Shipping. I preferred to remain private, focusing on our philanthropic foundation and strategic planning. After his death, I made a conscious decision to step further back from public view. Privacy is something the truly wealthy understand the value of," Jonathan added smoothly. "Unlike newly minted millionaires who plaster their names on buildings, old money tends to avoid publicity." Victoria's lips thinned at what she clearly perceived as a dig at the Hamilton family, whose name adorned their headquarters. "Rebecca handles most public-facing aspects of the business now," I continued. "If you Google Sullivan Shipping, you'll find numerous mentions of Rebecca Sullivan, COO, but very few references to me." "Convenient," Victoria muttered. Charles set down his water glass with more force than necessary. "Victoria, enough. The documentation you've seen is legitimate. Margaret's identity and financial status have been verified beyond any reasonable doubt. If you persist in suggesting otherwise, this lunch will be very short indeed." Victoria flushed but didn't back down. "Fine. Let's say it's all true. That still doesn't explain why you kept this from us for 3 years. Why the deception?" "There was no deception," I corrected firmly. "Only discretion. And as for why," I glanced at Charles, who nodded encouragingly. "When Michael died, I discovered how quickly wealth changes how people see you. Suddenly, I wasn't Margaret Sullivan the person, but Margaret Sullivan the billionaire widow. Every interaction became suspect. Was someone being kind because they liked me, or because they wanted something from me?" I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. "When I met your father at the charity auction, he had no idea who I was. He saw me. Just me. Do you have any idea how rare and precious that is?" Something flickered in Catherine's eyes. Understanding. Perhaps even sympathy. "After we started dating, I considered telling him," I continued. "But the longer I waited, the more complicated it became. And the truth is, I was enjoying being valued for myself, not my bank account." "So you moved into our family home, let Dad buy you things, all while sitting on a fortune?" Alexander challenged. "Your father insisted I move into the Hamilton estate because it meant something to him." "To your family history," I replied evenly. "As for gifts, I've accepted very few, and those of sentimental rather than monetary value. Check your father's financial records if you doubt me." Victoria leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "What about the prenup? Did you sign it knowing all along it was irrelevant?" "I signed it because it was important to your father to protect your inheritance," I said simply. "And yes, I knew my own assets were secure. But that doesn't make the prenup meaningless. It established clean boundaries, which is always wise in marriage, regardless of relative wealth." The arrival of our first course provided a momentary reprieve from the tension. As we began eating, Catherine spoke up for the first time since her siblings had arrived. "I'd like to hear more about Sullivan Shipping," she said. "The global logistics challenges you must navigate are fascinating from an operations perspective." I smiled, recognizing the olive branch she was extending. For the next several minutes, I outlined some of the company's current strategies and challenges: the shift toward green shipping technology, regulatory complexities in emerging markets, the integration of AI and route optimization. Catherine asked intelligent questions, demonstrating a genuine interest that gradually drew even Alexander into the conversation. Victoria remained largely silent, picking at her salad and watching the exchange with unreadable eyes. When our main courses arrived, she finally spoke again. "This collaboration proposal," she said, indicating the document we'd reviewed earlier, "is it contingent on our acceptance of your revelation?" "The business opportunity stands on its own merits," I replied. "Sullivan Shipping has been considering strategic partnerships in manufacturing for some time. Hamilton Industries is an excellent candidate regardless of my marriage to your father. But surely there are larger manufacturing conglomerates that would offer more significant advantages," she pressed. I met her gaze directly. "Larger, yes. Better run? Not necessarily. Hamilton Industries has an exceptional operational efficiency, record and innovation pipeline. Those factors matter more than sheer size." Victoria seemed taken aback by the genuine professional respect in my assessment. "However," I continued, "while the business case is solid, I won't pretend personal relationships are irrelevant. Any partnership requires trust. If you and Alexander cannot move past seeing me as an enemy or interloper, collaboration would be difficult regardless of potential profits." Alexander set down his fork. "You must understand our perspective. For 3 years, we've operated under certain assumptions about our family's future, the company's direction." "Assumptions that were never validated," Charles interjected. "Assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts." "Perhaps," Alexander acknowledged reluctantly. "But this changes everything." "Does it?" I asked quietly. "Does knowing I have my own wealth change who I am as a person? Does it alter my character, my values, my love for your father?" "It changes the power dynamic," Victoria said bluntly. I nodded, appreciating her candor if not her tone. "Yes, it does. But perhaps not in the way you think. It means I have never needed anything from the Hamilton family except acceptance. It means your inheritance has always been secure. It means the only thing I've ever wanted was to be part of your family. Not for financial gain, but for the simple human desire to belong." A heavy silence fell over the table. The waiter appeared to clear our plates, and we declined dessert in tacit agreement that this conversation needed no further prolonging. "What happens now?" Catherine finally asked, looking between her father and me. Charles took my hand. "Now we move forward with truth rather than misconception. Margaret and I will continue our life together. Hamilton Industries will continue under my leadership, with all 3 of you playing the roles you've earned through your own merit." He paused, looking at each of his children in turn. "And perhaps, if you're willing, we might explore how this new knowledge creates opportunities rather than threats." Victoria pushed back her chair abruptly. "I need time to think about all this." "Of course," I said. "This is a significant adjustment. I don't expect immediate acceptance." Alexander rose as well, his expression guarded but less openly hostile than before. "The collaboration proposal, may I keep it to review more thoroughly?" "Certainly," I replied, surprised by this concession. "Jonathan can provide additional details if you have questions." Victoria was already halfway to the door, but Alexander hesitated. "For what it's worth," he said stiffly, "I apologize for any assumptions that may have been unfair. It wasn't exactly warm, but it was something." "Thank you, Alexander." After they departed, Catherine remained, studying me with thoughtful eyes. "You know," she said finally, "when I was 12, my mother told me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'Catherine, in business and in life, the person who holds the real power is rarely the one shouting about it.'" I smiled, recognizing Elizabeth Hamilton's wisdom. By all accounts, she had been a remarkable woman. "Your mother sounds like someone I would have respected greatly." "I think," Catherine said slowly, "she might have respected you too." She stood and gathered her purse. "I have a meeting this afternoon, but perhaps we could have tea tomorrow? I'd like to hear more about your foundation work." I'd like that very much, I replied warmly. After Catherine left, Charles, Jonathan, and I remained. At the table, the tension of the past hours finally dissipating. Well, Jonathan said, that went better than I expected with at least one of them. Charles sighed. Victoria has always been the most like her grandfather. Stubborn, proud. She'll take the longest to come around if she ever does. And Alexander? I asked. Alexander follows the money, Charles said frankly. Always has. Once he fully processes the business opportunities your connection represents, he'll adjust his perspective accordingly. Mercenary but practical, Jonathan observed. And Catherine seems genuinely interested in building a relationship, I noted, not just because of Sullivan shipping, but because she's intellectually curious. Charles smiled proudly. She's always been the thoughtful one, less concerned with power and status than with understanding how things work, including people. As we left the restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was finally out, for better or worse. The path forward might not be smooth, but at least it would be honest. Dinner at home tonight? Charles asked as we reached our cars. Just the two of us? Perfect, I agreed, kissing his cheek. I think we've had enough family drama for one day. Jonathan bid us farewell, promising to send the additional materials Alexander had requested. As I watched his car pull away, I reflected on how differently this day had unfolded from what Victoria and Alexander had planned just a week ago. Their scheme to cut me out of Charles's will, their certainty that I was nothing but a financial burden. The Bentley I had kept in storage for 3 years was being delivered to the Hamilton estate that afternoon, a small but symbolic step in reclaiming my full identity. Not as a statement of wealth or power, but simply as an acknowledgement that I no longer needed to hide who I was. That evening, as Charles and I shared a quiet dinner on the terrace, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from Rebecca. Well? She'd written, "Don't keep me in suspense. How did the grand revelation go?" I smiled, typing back a brief response. One ally, one pragmatist, one holdout. Progress, not perfection. Details when you visit next week. Charles refilled our wine glasses. To truth, he said, raising his in a toast. To new beginnings, I countered, clinking my glass against his. Whatever came next, whether Victoria's continued resistance or Alexander's calculated reassessment, or Catherine's genuine outreach, I faced it now as my complete self. Not Charles Hamilton's supposedly gold-digging wife, but Margaret Sullivan Hamilton, with all the strength, wisdom, and resources that identity entailed. The parasite they had dismissed now stood revealed as a powerful ally or formidable opponent. The choice was theirs. And for the first time in 3 years, I was finally free to be exactly who I was, without apology or pretense. 1 month after the revelation at Hamilton Industries, I stood at the window of my Boston office, watching seagulls circle the harbor. Sullivan Shipping's headquarters occupied a historic brick building overlooking the water, its understated elegance reflecting the company's philosophy of substance over show. I had been spending more time here lately, re-engaging with aspects of the business I had delegated during my self-imposed semi-retirement. Behind me, Rebecca was reviewing the final details for tomorrow's meeting with Hamilton Industries executive team, the first formal discussion of our potential collaboration. At 43, my daughter was the picture of confident competence, her dark hair cut in a sleek bob, her gestures economical as she marked key points in the presentation. The shipping cost reduction projections are impressive, she noted, glancing up from her tablet. Alexander Hamilton requested these numbers specifically. I think he's finally convinced this isn't just some family favor. I smiled, turning from the window. Alexander follows the money. Charles warned me that once he saw the potential benefits, his resistance would fade. And Victoria? Rebecca asked, arching an eyebrow. Any thaw in the Ice Queen? Professionally cordial, I replied, returning to my desk. She hasn't missed a preliminary meeting, asks sharp questions, and addresses me as Mrs. Hamilton with impeccable politeness. But personally, I sighed. Still distant. She declined our dinner invitation last week, sent a beautifully worded apology citing prior commitments. Rebecca shook her head. Her loss. I'm looking forward to meeting Catherine, though. From what you've said, she sounds like someone I could actually work with. You two have similar minds, I agreed. Analytical, curious, more interested in solving problems than claiming credit. I paused, remembering the surprising turn my relationship with Catherine had taken over the past month. She's been coming by the house twice a week to discuss the Sullivan Foundation's educational initiatives. I think she's genuinely interested in our scholarship program for women in STEM. A soft knock interrupted us. My assistant, Elaine, who had been with me for over 20 years, poked her head in. Mrs. Hamilton, your husband is here. Charles entered, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit that highlighted the silver in his hair. Even after 3 years of marriage, seeing him still brought a flutter of pleasure. Ladies, he greeted us with a warm smile. Am I interrupting important Sullivan business? Just finalizing tomorrow's presentation, Rebecca said, rising to give him a quick hug. After her initial skepticism about my remarriage, she had grown genuinely fond of Charles. How was your morning at Hamilton? Productive, until Victoria and Alexander started bickering over the Asia expansion strategy again. Charles loosened his tie, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs facing my desk. I left Catherine mediating. She's surprisingly effective at getting them to compromise. Speaking of compromise, I said, how are they feeling about tomorrow's meeting? Charles's expression turned thoughtful. Alexander's fully on board. The numbers won Jonathan over completely. Victoria is coming. Around, she actually asked if you thought Sullivan's Pacific shipping lanes could support Hamilton's planned manufacturing facility in Malaysia. That's the first time she's directly sought my input, I noted, unable to hide my surprise. Baby steps, Charles said with a small smile. Oh, and Catherine asked if Rebecca could join us for dinner tonight. She said something about wanting to discuss collaborative leadership models in family businesses. Rebecca grinned. Sounds like my kind of conversation. I'm in. As they continued chatting, I reflected on the dramatic shift in our family dynamics over the past month. The revelation of my true identity and worth had forced a recalibration, not just of the Hamilton children's perception of me, but of the entire family's future. Charles and I had moved permanently into my Boston home 3 weeks ago, after 33 years at the Hamilton estate. The decision had been practical. Sullivan Shipping's headquarters was here, and the Hamilton mansion held too many memories of Elizabeth for our new beginning. Victoria had seemed relieved, though she'd hidden it behind talk of preserving family history. We'd kept Charles's city apartment for when business required his presence at Hamilton Industries, but Boston had become our primary residence. That evening, our dining room overlooking the harbor was filled with conversation and the gentle clink of silverware. Catherine, who had driven up from Connecticut that afternoon, was engaged in animated discussion with Rebecca about the challenges of navigating male-dominated industries. The shipping sector can't be much different from manufacturing, Catherine was saying. The old boy networks, the assumptions about women in leadership. Rebecca nodded emphatically. Exactly. I still walk into negotiations where men direct their comments to my male VPs, even after being introduced as the COO. It's changing, but slowly, I added, passing the wine. When I started at Sullivan 50 years ago, I was literally the only woman in the boardroom. Now our executive team is nearly 40% female. Hamilton is behind on that metric, Catherine admitted. Only 22% of our senior leadership is female. It's something I've been pushing to address, but Victoria, ironically, has been resistant. Victoria believes in earning her place through merit alone, Charles observed. She's proud of achieving her position without, as she puts it, special consideration. That's the trap, though, Rebecca pointed out. The system is already skewed. Acknowledging that isn't asking for special treatment. It's recognizing reality. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. I've tried to explain that diversifying our leadership isn't about lowering standards. It's about removing artificial barriers. But Victoria sees any diversity initiative as implying she didn't earn her success. The conversation continued through dessert, ranging from business strategy to art, politics to technology. By the time we moved to the living room for coffee, I noticed Catherine checking her watch with a frown. Expecting a call? I asked. She hesitated. Actually, Victoria was supposed to text me when she finished reviewing the collaboration proposal. She promised to have her feedback to me by 9. Charles and I exchanged glances. Victoria's engagement with the Sullivan-Hamilton project had been professionally thorough, but personally detached. Perhaps she's still working on it, Charles suggested. You know how meticulous she can be. Catherine's phone chimed. She glanced down, her expression shifting to surprise. It's her. She wants to know if she can join our call tomorrow morning to discuss her feedback directly with Rebecca. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Interesting. That would be the first time. She's sought direct contact with me. Tell her yes, I said, making a quick decision. And if she'd like to join us for dinner afterwards, she's welcome. Catherine typed the response, then looked up with an uncertain smile. She says she'll be there for the call, and she accepts the dinner invitation. A small breakthrough, but significant. Victoria had been the most resistant to the new reality, her pride making it difficult to acknowledge she had misjudged me so completely. This small step toward engagement felt like a victory. Later that evening, after Catherine and Rebecca had retreated to their respective guest rooms, Charles and I sat in the study enjoying a nightcap before bed. Do you think Victoria's coming around? I asked, curled beside him on the leather sofa that had once belonged to my father. Charles swirled his scotch thoughtfully. Victoria has always been the most like her mother, strong-willed, proud, protective of what she considers hers. But she's also practical. If this collaboration proves valuable to Hamilton Industries, she'll adapt. It's not just business acceptance I'm hoping for, I admitted. After 3 years of trying to connect with her, Charles took my hand. I know, and it may still happen. Victoria doesn't give her trust easily, but once given, it's absolute. Like someone else I know, I said with a smile, thinking of my own guarded nature. Indeed, Charles chuckled. Perhaps that's why you two clash. You're more alike than either of you would care to admit. The next morning dawned bright and clear. A perfect September day that brought Boston Harbor to sparkling life. From my office window, I could see ships coming and going, some bearing the distinctive Sullivan blue livery, others representing shipping lines from around the world. Rebecca arrived early, polished and prepared in a navy suit that echoed Sullivan's corporate colors. Catherine joined us shortly after, looking fresh despite her late evening, a genuine warmth in her greeting that still surprised me after years of Hamilton coolness. Victoria's arrival, precisely at 9, created a subtle ripple of tension. She was impeccably dressed in a cream suit that highlighted her blonde hair, her posture rigid as she entered the conference room where we had gathered. "Good morning," she said formally, shaking hands with Rebecca and nodding to the rest of us. "Thank you for accommodating my request to join this call." Rebecca, never one to waste time on unnecessary tension, moved straight to business. "I understand you have feedback on the collaboration proposal. We're very interested in your perspective, Victoria." For the next hour, I watched a side of Victoria I had rarely glimpsed. Sharp, insightful, thoroughly professional as she outlined specific concerns and opportunities in the proposal. She had clearly spent hours analyzing the document, identifying potential synergies and challenges with equal precision. Your assessment of the regulatory complexities in Southeast Asian markets is particularly valuable, Rebecca acknowledged. Sullivan has historically focused on North Atlantic and Pacific routes. Your expertise in the ASEAN region would be a significant asset. Victoria seemed momentarily taken aback by the genuine professional respect in Rebecca's tone. I spent 3 years developing our Malaysia strategy, she said, a hint of pride breaking through her formal demeanor. The local regulatory landscape is challenging. Perhaps you'd consider joining our advance team for the Jakarta negotiations next month? Rebecca suggested. We could use that perspective. The offer, a genuine professional opportunity rather than a family courtesy, visibly surprised Victoria. She glanced at me, perhaps expecting interference, but I kept my expression neutral, allowing Rebecca to lead as COO. I'd need to check my schedule, Victoria said carefully. But yes, I would consider that. When the meeting concluded, there was a new energy in the room, the excitement of smart, capable people recognizing potential in collaboration. As we gathered our materials, Victoria approached me directly for the first time that day. You're Sullivan. Foundation Educational Initiative, she said abruptly. Catherine mentioned you're expanding the scholarship program to include business leadership tracks for women. Yes, I confirmed, surprised by her interest. We're launching at 5 universities next fall. Victoria nodded, her expression difficult to read. Hamilton Industries has an internship program for female engineering students. There might be potential alignment worth exploring. It wasn't an apology for 3 years of cold hostility. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was an olive branch, small, tentative, but unmistakable. I'd be very interested in discussing that, I said simply. The business dinner that evening was held at Liberty, an upscale restaurant overlooking the harbor. I had deliberately chosen a neutral location rather than hosting at my home, giving Victoria the emotional space to engage on her own terms. To my surprise, she arrived early, finding me already seated at our private table. Mrs. Hamilton, she greeted me formally. Margaret, please, I countered gently. We're family, after all. Victoria hesitated, then sat across from me. For a moment, we regarded each other in silence. 2 strong-willed women who had circled each other warily for 3 years. I owe you an apology, she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her. My assumptions about your motives for marrying my father were unfounded and unfair. I hadn't expected this direct acknowledgement. Thank you, Victoria. That means a great deal to me. I still don't understand, she continued, a hint of her characteristic bluntness returning. Why you endured our treatment for so long. With your resources, your position? Why tolerate it? I considered my answer carefully. When you reach my age, Victoria, you learn that wealth and power aren't the only forms of capital worth cultivating. Family, connection, belonging, these have their own value. But we didn't make you feel like family, she pointed out, a rare flash of self-awareness. Quite the opposite. No, I agreed, but I saw the possibility, the potential. Your father loves you deeply, and I wanted to be part of that love, not an obstacle to it. I paused, then added, and I'm stubborn. Once I commit to something, or someone, I don't give up easily. A ghost of a smile flickered across Victoria's face. That, at least, we have in common. Before we could continue, Charles arrived with Rebecca, Alexander, and Catherine. The atmosphere shifted to something more general, but the private moment had served its purpose. A foundation, however tentative, for something beyond mere professional cooperation. Dinner progressed more easily than I had dared hope. Business. Talk gradually gave way to family stories, shared memories, even occasional laughter. Victoria remained the most reserved, but she participated, offering dry observations that sometimes bordered on humor. As dessert was served, Charles raised his glass in an impromptu toast. To new beginnings, he said, looking around the table at his children and the women he loved. And to family, in all its complex, evolving forms. We clinked glasses, the simple ritual somehow significant. 3 months ago, I had overheard Victoria and Alexander plotting to cut me out of their father's life, dismissing me as a parasitic gold digger. Tonight we sat at the same table, not yet fully reconciled, but moving tentatively toward understanding. Later that night, as Charles and I prepared for bed in our Boston home, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, both of us looking out, at the harbor lights reflecting on the water. "Happy?" he asked softly. I leaned back against him, considering the question. Content, I decided, hopeful. Victoria's olive branch surprised me, he admitted. I wasn't sure she'd ever been that pride of hers. "She's your daughter," I said. Stubborn but not unreasonable. She needed time to adjust her worldview. And Alexander seems completely won over by the business possibilities. I laughed softly. As you predicted, he follows the money. And Catherine is a gift, I said warmly. A bridge builder. She and Rebecca will change both our companies for the better, I think. Charles turned me in his arms, his expression suddenly serious. Thank you for your patience with my children. A lesser woman would have revealed her true worth much sooner, forced their respect rather than earning it. Forced respect isn't respect at all, I countered. Besides, there was something liberating about being underestimated. It made their eventual recognition more meaningful. He chuckled, shaking his head in wonder. The gold digger who was worth billions all along. It would make quite a story. Our story, I corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Still being written day by day. As we settled into bed, I reflected on the long, strange journey that had brought us here. From that first meeting at the charity auction, where Charles had seen me simply as Margaret, not as the Sullivan shipping heiress. Through 3 years of enduring his children's suspicion and contempt, to the dramatic revelation and now, finally, the first tentative steps toward genuine family connection. Victoria had called me a parasite, a gold digger, a burden. She had assumed I married her father for financial security, never imagining that I brought to the marriage wealth that dwarfed the Hamilton fortune many times over. But in the end, the revelation of my true worth had never been about money. It had been about identity, respect, and the complex dance of family dynamics. The gold they had accused me of digging had turned out to be something far more valuable than mere finances. The precious metal of truth, understanding, and perhaps, someday love. At 68, I had learned that some treasures take time to unearth. But with patience, perspective, and the wisdom that only comes with years, even the most unlikely bonds could begin to form. The Hamilton children were not my flesh and blood, but they were part of the man I loved, and therefore, part of my heart. Gold. Digger? Perhaps. But the gold I sought had always been the kind that couldn't be counted in dollars or displayed in vaults, the rich, complex wealth of family, belonging, and acceptance. And at last, that precious vein was beginning to glimmer. On the horizon, up next you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.